Parshas Noach. This week's Parsha describes how society and its morals had declined to such an extent that God determined it was necessary to destroy all but one family and remaining animals, representatives of organic living, if you will. And Noach and his family built an ark. They brought in animals into the ark, and the ones who were in the ark were saved, and everyone else was destroyed. When they eventually exited the ark after the flood, Noach brought offerings from animals, and the response by God was positive. Now let's listen to what he says. This is in Preoccupation, pasuk Chaf Aleph. That's 8:21 in Bereshis, Genesis. The verse following the verse that talks about Noach's offering says as follows: Vayarach Hashem es reach hanichach. Hashem smelled the beautiful smell. That it doesn't say of the offering, but that's the implication here. Vayomer Hashem el libo, and Hashem said to himself, Lo osif lekalel od es ha'adama bavur adam. I will never again curse the ground on account of man. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ra minu urav. Because the designs of man's heart are evil from his youth. V'lo osif od lahakos es kol chai kasher osisi. And I will not again smite all life as I have done. So there are two things that are going on here. First of all, it's quite obvious that the declaration, God's declaration of his determination not to destroy the world again, followed immediately the offering that Noach brought. Secondly, Hashem observes that, and cites as kind of, it appears to be as kind of an excuse for man, that man's thoughts, the designs of his heart, are evil from his youth. So first of all, that's a curious rationalization. Why that would be a good reason not to destroy man. Now, the question is bolstered by a verse from last week's Parsha, from the very first Parsha of the Torah. At the very end of the Parsha, this is in Vav, that's chapter 6, and it's pasuk Hey, chapter 6, verse 5. The Torah says as follows: Vayar Hashem ki rabba ra'as ha'adam ba'aretz, and Hashem saw that the evil of man was great on the earth. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak kol hayom, and that every design of his heart's thoughts was only evil all day long. Sounds familiar. The problem is that this phenomenon, if you will, this state of affairs of man's constant preoccupation with evil, is given as a reason to destroy the world. What's going on here? The following verse, that's 6, says, Vayinochem Hashem, ki asa es adam ba'aretz, vaysasev al libo, and God regretted that he had made man on the earth, and he was pained to his heart. And then that leads to the introduction of the destruction. Vayomer Hashem, emche es adam asher barasi me'al pnei adama. Hashem says, this is in Pasuk Zion, verse 7, I will destroy man that I created from on the face of the earth. So which is it? Is man's preoccupation with evil a reason to destroy the world, or is it a reason not to destroy the world? It seems to be that God's very same words are contradictory. So are they the very same words? Let's think about it. So the Malbim says that there's actually a difference between the account of man's evil thoughts, evil preoccupation with evil in Bereshis, in Genesis, and that in our Parsha, Noach. He says in Bereshis, where it talks about, there's an additional word here, which is this notion of man's designs, not just his thoughts, not just Yetzer Leiv Ha'adam, but this is Machshavos Libo, the thoughts, but more than thoughts, is plans and designs, are rak ra kol hayom. They are exclusively evil. Malbim says that this represents degradation in society, which is taking something that is evil and not treating it as a temptation, a failing, a temporary fall, but rather idealizing the evil itself. So one can be fundamentally good, but do bad things because one succumbs to one's what we call Yetzer Hara, the evil inclination. It's not always easy to be good. And sometimes there are temptations to which people fall, or they succumb, despite the fact that they want to do good, despite the fact that it's not what they want to do, whether it's venal corruption, or sexual impropriety, or lashon hara, which is evil speech about other people, negative speech. Many people, especially morally sensitive people, don't want to do those things, but sometimes they do succumb, and sometimes they feel very guilty about it. That's one type of yetzer hara. That's one type of preoccupation with the evil. And every human being has some skeletons, shall we say. The Pasuk says, Adam ein ba'aretz asher yasa tov v'lo yachta. There is no ein tzadik ba'aretz asher yasa tov v'lo yachta. There's no righteous person who never sins. The Talmud talks about 4 people who did not sin. And that's it. 4. And even they made mistakes, or at least some of them did, to our knowledge. The other kind of evil are the people who is the type that is idealized, that rather than being viewed as moral lapses or a weakness or a vulnerability to temptation, the sin itself, the action that is sinful, is characterized as an ideal. That kind of society is worthy of destruction, says the Torah. The other is not. Now, why would that come following God's smelling, if you will, in anthropomorphic terms, the offering of Noach? Well, it would seem consistent with the Malbim's approach that somebody who is offering a sacrifice to God is subscribing to God's ideals, wants to please God. That demonstrates that the evil, if you will, that preoccupies the individual is not a matter of ideal or ideology, but rather is indeed a deviation from that individual's moral standards. My Rabbi, Aharon Soloveichik, gave a somewhat different interpretation of this, which is not incompatible with that of the Malbim, but takes a different direction. He takes a look at the term minu'urav. Minu'urav means from his youth. And he says, what is the quintessential predilection of youth? It's imitation. Predisposition. It's imitation. And it's necessary. That preference to do what other people are doing is actually necessary for our development. That's how we develop speech. That's why anybody who is understanding what I'm saying now has heard English and has modeled his speech so that he can speak English, even if it's not his first language, not his mother tongue, but nevertheless it's through imitation. Imitation enables us to do all kinds of things. I have very young grandchildren who regularly imitate their older siblings because that's the model. And that's necessary for developing language, for developing behavior. It's even necessary for developing morals. When we grow up in a home where people say please and thank you, the children tend to say please and thank you. And if somebody grows up in a home where people just make demands or just take things without saying thank you, the children tend not to. So imitation is important not just for language development and behavior development, but even for moral development. But at some point, it becomes a liability. The tendency to imitate can become a tendency to accommodate evil and to follow in the behaviors of others uncritically. And then it becomes a problem. And that which starts out as necessary for human development can become a problem, a moral problem for people. When that becomes rampant, there's one thing to do, and that is to reduce the likelihood that people will imitate each other. And Hashem, as it were, says, I can do that. And that's what leads to the dor haflaga, to the generation of dispersion. And there, God reduced the possibility of imitation by saying, and this follows promptly after the narrative of the flood, God reduces the possibility of imitation by rendering people incapable of understanding each other. And as a result, different cultures arise. And that creates pockets of human beings who cannot imitate the other pockets of human beings because they simply don't understand them and they can't communicate with them. And as a result, the world and humanity can be saved from total destruction. There are some cases where little pockets of humanity would need to be eliminated, such as with Sodom and Gomorrah, but never again the entire world, because now we have a tradition and a culture which is, although it is devoted in some manner to imitate, but it is also can be independent of evil forces and therefore capable of redemption without total destruction. We aim to emulate, to imitate the good, and to be fiercely independent when we're exposed to evil so that we can preserve our morality and the morality of the world. Have a good Shabbos.